Hello, and welcome to the Ottoman History podcast. This is episode 3, the Catalan Company. We finished the previous episode with the Ottoman victory in the Battle of Baphius in 1302. With this victory, Ottomans for the first time fought and defeated an imperial Byzantine army. This bolstered Osman's reputation among the Turkic nomads of Anatolia, and resulted in thousands rallying under his banners. Immediately after this victory, Osman marched west and defeated another militia army gathered by the ruler of Prusa. Following this victory, Kita and Ulubad were captured. These towns were right next to Prusa, and this advance opened the Ottoman path to Prusa. By 1302, the Byzantine Empire was in a very perilous situation. While the Byzantine campaign in Baphius was ongoing, Michael IX Palaiologos, the son and co-emperor to Andronicus II, had gathered a much larger army near the city of Magnesia. Magnesia lay further south in the Anatolian peninsula, some 60 kilometers northeast to the important port city of Smyrna. Michael's army was one of the largest Byzantine armies of the era. According to historian Pachymedes, Emperor had mustered an army of 16,000, with 10,000 of them being alien mercenaries, and the remaining 6 being peasant militias. Just like in Baphius, however, alien mercenaries brought little but trouble to the Byzantines here. They raided local towns and villages, and devastated the area, and upon the first sight of Turks, they fled the field, causing a disastrous Byzantine defeat in Magnesia. Michael was forced to retreat north, and the Byzantine territories in the Aegean coast would eventually be left to the various Turkish beyliks. Meanwhile, aliens ran all the way to Europe, raiding and pillaging Byzantine towns and cities as they fled. Within a few months, 2 Byzantine armies were completely defeated by the Turks. This shattered the Byzantine morale and caused many in the court to believe that the war against the Turks was lost. Thus, Michael's further attempts to gather another army to oppose the Turkish advances failed. Michael lacked the political support, the coin, and soldiers to muster another force. In early 1303, he fell seriously ill and retreated to northwest, to Pegae Fortress, which stood just south of the Marmara Sea. With these defeats, and Michael's consequent retreat, the fate of the Byzantine territories on the Aegean coast were sealed, at least for the foreseeable future. The events of 1302 clearly showed the collapse and erosion of the Byzantine military institutions. Emperor Andronicus, in my opinion, was one of the most short-sighted and abysmal emperors to ever rule, to an extent that one might even call him a traitor. Despite being a completely civilian man himself and having no expertise in military affairs, Andronicus's reign marked colossal military reforms. Andronicus defunded the military of the empire and disbanded all the military personnel and retinues, as he believed that a professional mercenary force would be cheaper and more effective than the empire's own armies. However, as anyone with some common sense could guess, this ended up terribly for the Byzantine Empire. Not only these mercenaries were disloyal and had their own agendas, but since Andronicus always tried to cut costs, they were also the cheapest ones available. As a result, the battle prowess of these mercenaries was abysmal. The alien mercenaries Andronicus had hired were nothing but a rabble of brigands. They were more than happy to collect a paycheck and then desert the battlefield upon the first sight of the enemy. This reliance on low-quality mercenary groups was the reason behind abysmal Byzantine performance against Osman and other Turks in this period. Seeing the impossibility of dealing with the Turks and encroaching Bulgarians on his own, Emperor Andronicus started looking for outside support. He contacted the Ilkhanate ruler, Ghazan Khan, offering an alliance against the Turkmens of Anatolia, and topped off this proposal with a royal marriage, offering the hand of his daughter, Princess Despina. Ghazan Khan accepted this alliance offer. However, while the princess was on her way to the Ilkhan capital in Iran, Ghazan Khan died and was succeeded by Olcaytu Khan. Even though Olcaytu also accepted the alliance offer and married Princess Despina, he did not deliver on his end. In reality, the Ilkhanate was too preoccupied with its internal conflicts and the war against the Mamluk Sultanate to intervene in Anatolia. Andronicus would receive no help from the east. His attempts to find allies proved to be more successful in the west, however. In January of 1303, mercenary Catalan Company, led by Roger de Flor, arrived in Constantinople. This mercenary company consisted of 8,000 men, and unlike the poorer quality mercenaries such as the Alans, the Catalan Company was made of battle-hardened professional soldiers, and they were a major game changer in the early 14th century Anatolia, which was filled with non-existent Byzantine armies and undisciplined tribal Turkish hordes. Roger de Flor was made the commander of the imperial Byzantine armies, and consequently defeated several Turkish armies on the Aegean coast, momentarily stabilizing the Byzantine front in Asia. The arrival of the Catalan Company posed a great threat to Osman. Combined with the potential threats of a Mongol invasion, Ottoman attacks stopped between 1302 and 1308. Thus, despite his victory in Bapheus, the siege of Nicaea was lifted, and Ottomans stopped making advances around Persia for around half a decade. As proven countless times in history, relying solely on mercenaries proved to be a very bad decision for the Byzantine Empire. Roger de Flor and his Catalans completely devastated the lands they took from the Turks. The Catalans treated the locals so bad that the Greek historians at the time wrote that even the Turkish yoke was preferable to Catalan destruction. With the Catalan attacks on local Byzantines and their growing fame, Emperor Andronicus was growing more wary of the Catalans every passing day. Despite their successes in the battlefield, Catalan cruelty in the newly captured settlements not only made these areas worthless ruins, but also turned the local Christians against the empire. In Magnesia, local Greeks, supported by the Alan mercenaries that were hired previously, revolted, and then attacked and massacred the Catalonian garrison. When Roger learned of this, he was furious. He swiftly marched on Magnesia and besieged the castle. The emperor had enough. The Catalans had simply outlived their usefulness. Roger was invited to Adrianople and was assassinated in a banquet given to his honor. Emperor Andronicus likely expected the Catalans to disperse after losing their commander, but much to the emperor's dismay, this did not happen. The mercenary company simply elected a new leader and invaded the territories of the Byzantine Empire. Now, I will not go into further detail about the war between the Byzantines and the Catalan Company. However, for our purposes, it should be noted that the Catalans went on to defeat several Byzantine armies, sacked, pillaged, and razed Byzantine territories for almost a decade, eventually invading southern Greece and establishing a country there for themselves. All this, and wars in the Balkans against Serbians and Bulgarians, crippled the Byzantine Empire for 2 decades until 1320s, leaving Anatolia at the mercy of the Ottomans. City and fortress garrisons were left on their own to defend their respective cities and fortresses, and could no longer count on help from Constantinople. This clarifies a good portion of the Ottoman-Byzantine conflict in early 1300s and explains the lack of action from the Byzantine side for decades. On the other hand, to the eastern frontier, in 1308, Seljuk Sultan of Konya, Mesud II, died. This is the officially accepted date for the collapse of the Seljuk state and the Seljuk dynasty. Its capital Konya was first claimed by a distant relative of the Sultan and then by the Karamanid Turks, who would come to dominate the central Anatolian plateau until 15th century and become the most powerful Turkish state until the rise of the Ottomans later on. The relevance of the Seljuk collapse for us now is that it signified the end of the Mongol rule in Anatolia. From now on, Turkish beyliks were independent and would start actively contending with each other for the supremacy of the peninsula. Osman got back on track with his jihad against the Byzantines in 1313. Ottomans cut off the road between Nicaea and Nicomedia and took half a dozen towns between Nicaea and Prusa. Both cities were getting more and more isolated every year, and Ottoman chokehold was getting tighter. However, despite enjoying complete freedom to move in the absence of any Byzantine resistance in the field, Ottomans still failed to take the larger cities that were protected by thick stone walls. In 1315, Osman besieged Prusa, but had to lift the siege after the Ottoman assaults on the city walls proved too ineffective and costly. It was clear that the Ottomans lacked the expertise to assault the walls. Osman instead ordered 2 forts around Prusa to be built, to be able to cut off the city from supplies. By 1317, Ottoman forces overran the entire area near Bursa, capturing the nearby towns and villages. This year is considered as the official date that the siege of Prusa started. However, we can see that Ottoman siege was rather ineffective from the fact that Bursa would fall all the way in 1326, 9 years later, making it one of the longest sieges in history. If the Ottomans were able to maintain a proper siege and effectively cut off Bursa from getting supplies, it would have been impossible to feed the garrison and the population for almost a decade. From now on, in this podcast, we will see a general trend of Ottoman forces getting bogged down in walled cities. This is especially surprising when we consider that historically castles and cities left to their fate without an active defense do not tend to survive that long. We see an example of this in the Mongol invasion of Khwarezmia. After the Khwarezmian armies retreated behind their city walls, Mongols gained complete dominance on the field and picked off isolated cities one by one within a short period. However, early Ottomans were evidently no Mongols. Ottomans lacked 2 qualities that were key to rapid Mongol success. The first of these was the siege engineering expertise. Mongols extensively studied siege warfare and recruited engineers from their subjects to build these siege engines. Secondly, and more importantly, the Mongol army was a professional, standing military force. Mongolian warriors followed their commanders all across Eurasia, campaigning thousands of kilometers away from their homelands and families in wars that lasted for years. Meanwhile, what Osman had in early 1300s was a horde of part-time raiders. Ghazis working for Osman would join Osman's army in the raiding season and then go back to their homes and families afterwards, preventing Osman from keeping his army together for long periods of time. Now, this was not a big deal for field battles, as battles did not last for long, and promised a great amount of loot. When it came to long sieges, however, it was nigh impossible for the early Ottoman army to maintain. These sieges required soldiers to sit in a camp for months or maybe even years while they waited for the defenders to run out of food. Even though a successful siege also offered significant loot to the raiders, the victory was uncertain and time-consuming, and the raiders would much rather pillage towns and villages that were easier to attack. As a result, Ottoman sieges in this period were very hard to maintain and were ineffective at starving out particularly Nicaea and Persia. Another important event of 1317 is that in 1317, with the siege of Persia, we see Osman disappear from military campaigns. By this date, Osman was fairly old by medieval standards, at the age of 59, and was troubled with a bad case of gout. The sickness prevented Osman from riding his horse and made it impossible for him to lead military campaigns. He gave the overall command to his eldest son Orhan, sent his other commanders to the frontiers to raid Byzantine territory, and retreated to his court, Karacahisar. Between 1317 and 1321, Osman's commanders expanded Ottoman territory with small-time conquests around Nicaea and Persia. Meanwhile, in 1321, Prince Orhan, seeing the ineffectiveness of the siege of Persia, marched on Mudanya and captured the town. Mudanya was a small port on the southern coast of the Marmara Sea and was used by the Byzantines to supply the garrison in Persia. With the Ottoman conquest of Mudanya, Orhan was cutting off Persia from Europe, thus tightening the siege. Orhan then spent the remaining of the campaigning season of 1321 further isolating Persia by taking smaller towns and villages around the city. Orhan's forces took the town of Atranos, 30 kilometers south of Persia, and the ruler of the town was killed while trying to flee the Ottoman troops. This area to this day is known as Orhaneli, meaning the land of Orhan in Turkish. After 1320, we see the name Osman Gazi disappear from historical records. It is possible that he died at this date. However, Ottoman sources between 1320 and 1324 refrain from calling Osman's son Orhan with the title of the ruler, Bey. Only in 1324, Orhan is referred as a Bey, which would indicate that Osman died in that year. However, Osman's exact date of death remains ambiguous. His place of death also remains as a mystery, thanks to lack of proper Ottoman record keeping, though it is assumed that he died in Suud, likely due to gout. Osman is described as a tall and intimidating man with a dark complexion. He preferred to wear a red turban, as was the customary among the Chagatai Mongols of Central Asia. During his reign, he proved not only a shrewd military man, but also a good diplomat and statesman. He masterfully avoided confrontation with the Seljuk Sultans, Ilkhans, and other Turkish tribes in the region. This allowed Osman to shine as a holy warrior of Islam, resulting in high numbers of nomads joining his army. During his reign, Osman quadrupled the lands he inherited from his father Ertuğrul, and left his son Orhan a sizable country, slightly smaller than modern Slovenia. Osman did not die as a great emperor. He lived and died as a modest tribal chieftain, spending most of his life in tents or on horseback. Upon his death, he left several horses, 100 or so sheep, and a pair of boots to his sons. That was the inheritance Osman's sons received, that and the small yet ever-growing Ottoman Beylik. We will end this episode here with Osman's death. Please subscribe and leave a like if you have come this far, and I will see you on the next one to talk about Orhan's ascension to the throne, the siege of Bursa, and the Battle of Peloponnesus. Thank you for watching, and peace be upon you.